everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. Welcome to Unit 3 of Economics and Personal Finance. So, this unit we're going to talk about the government and the economy, the government's involvement in the economy, what they can control, what they don't control, how they manipulate it, what their overall goals are. A lot of cool stuff to talk about. Let's go ahead and get started. So this unit is we're going to talk about the government and the economy. We're going to look at it from quite a few different perspectives on what the government does to regulate the economy, what has caused that to happen. We're also going to start talking about some trade deficits, and then at the very end of this unit, we're actually going to talk about the North Carolina economy a little bit. So today, let's talk about government regulation. So government regulation is kind of the backbone here to the government and the economy. So America, which is what this course is going to be focused on for the economy here in America, we are a mixed economy, all right, closer to a market economy than anything else, but we are a mixed economy. For that reason, the government doesn't control the economy and own it like they would in like a communist country. So the government, while it doesn't own the economy, does have regulations on the economy, and there's a ton of them. In pop culture, you go on the internet where it's like, oh, the government regulations, and there are a ton of government regulations that regulate how business is done, what you can or can't do, type of fees you have to pay, licensing. You can get in trouble for doing things the wrong way in business. So people like to, here's our rules for the government, like the Constitution's a single page long. We've even changed that 27 times, but we talked about that if you had me for civics. So the laws and regulations, yes, there are a bunch of them. So why are there a bunch of laws and regulations that control the way the government runs the economy? Well, let's start out by talking about a general concept here of the basis for it. So there's this thing called the American Dream. The American Dream is fundamentally kind of what the economy in the United States was based on. Is the idea that if you come to the United States and you work really hard here, and this is talking specifically about immigrants, but just generally anybody that's an American, if you work really hard, you can become successful. Because when America was founded, all right, that wasn't really the case in other countries. You were kind of born into either a class system or a economy which you couldn't really move up. So America has really, stuck by this concept of the American Dream that if you come and you work hard enough, you can be as successful as you want to be in this country. So this little graph here, which is actually supposed to, this little cartoon is supposed to be critical of the American Dream, but I think for my purposes here, it works out really well to explain what I'm trying to talk about here in this unit. So this cartoon is saying that the American dream is crumbling and that they're making the point that it's harder today to work really hard and be super successful than it was 100 years ago, which is a subjective statement. Whether that's true or not, you can make arguments on both sides and be convincing on both sides. With that being said, the reason I like this cartoon is in this cartoon, this wall, this infrastructure that they're walking on is crumbling. This is the stairway up to the American Dream. If this stairwell in this cartoon collapses, there's no way for Americans to get to the American Dream. So who's going to fix this? Well, that would be the United States government. And that's what we're going to talk about here in this unit, is government regulation. The government's job is to try their hardest to make the American dream accessible to as many people as possible. So the government regulations that we're going to talk about is all here trying to help people achieve the American dream. It's not going to do it for them. It's not going to walk them up there, but it's supposed to keep these staircases intact so that it is an equal playing field for everybody. An equal playing field for everybody goes back to a term we've talked about a ton here in the economic portions of this course, economic stability. The entire purpose of government regulation, all right, in order to protect this walkway is to have economic stability. You don't want to have rich people up here, poor people down here, and there is no way of moving up. That would be catastrophic in our economy, even though it definitely feels like that sometimes. The entire purpose of the government regulation is to make sure that everybody has an access, and a lot of the government regulations are going to regulate big businesses because big businesses left unchecked have a tendency to try to prevent other people from creating big businesses because they don't want the competition. That way they can control prices. So economic stability is the main goal of government regulation, and this is why the government regulates a lot of the economy, is to try to make it a level playing field for people. So the question here is, explain what the overall goals are for the government regulation in the U.S. economy. So pause me, answer that completely, and we're moving on. All right, so let's start talking about antitrust laws. This is a big hammer, all right? This is something that it relatively runs smoothly in the background modern day, so you're probably not super familiar with it. So the best way of explaining the importance of antitrust laws is to talk about what happened before we had these. So America, before we had any government regulation, we based our economy on this concept of laissez-faire economics, which literally means hands off. All right. So the 1700s into the 1800s, the United States government's whole goal was to just let people be. If you make a company that's worth $1 million, hooray, good job on you. Which, before any country like ours that allowed this, all right, it allowed people to be super rich in this market revolution. This is going down a little rabbit hole there. Before any of that, this was unheard of. So, cool, everybody was happy with this. The government doesn't have to do anything. Let the private business do private business, no government regulation. Well, what ended up happening, all right, is the people that started getting super successful, like Rockefeller, Vanderbilt, Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, these guys, they are called captains of industry, if you like them, or they're called robber barons. Now, they basically created monopolies in pivotal industries like steel, oil, railroads. Now, I also want to point out in this graph, these are two separate pictures. The men don't line up with the industry that they're in charge of. Like Rockefeller was oil, Carnegie was steel, Vanderbilt was railroads. J.P. Morgan, like, he must be the sugar guy. Yeah, it's actually banking. Anyway, so what happened was these guys created monopolies. And when they did that, they kept anybody else from achieving the American dream in the oil industry. So Rockefeller would go out of his way to make sure there was no competition with him. And once it was just a handful of like crazy rich people, and then they prevented other people from being successful, the government's like, well, maybe we need to get involved here. But it wasn't easy because, as this cartoon dictates, the robber barons realized the only people that could really come in and stop them would be the government, and the government wasn't doing anything. So to get ahead of this, the robber barons really went through and they would like pay for senators to run for re-election and basically controlled senators. So this is what this is symbolizing here, is that those robber barons controlled the whole Senate. So even before laws could get passed, the rich people controlled the government. So what are we going to do? Well, they end up passing some laws called antitrust laws. All right. So I've said the word monopoly, and if this was called the anti-monopoly law, it would make sense to you. For this course, and the way we're talking about just trust and monopoly, you can use those interchangeably. So trust means a monopoly. So it's the anti-monopoly laws. All right. That basically says you can't do this. So how did that happen? Like, how did the government, which was run by the rich people, for the rich people, where did this come from where all of a sudden the government's going to come out and be like, no, you can't do that anymore? Well, it's actually in large part due to this dude, all right? Theodore Roosevelt. So Theodore Roosevelt is actually a war hero. He becomes the president because he was very famous in the war, in the Spanish-American War. And when he came in, he aggressively went after these trusts and busted them up. Without Theodore Roosevelt, this probably wouldn't have happened, because as soon as the trust got busted up, this does not mean when the government came in and made these antitrust laws that they took these businesses from these people and said, you're going to jail. It's not what happened. They said, hey, you have to sell part of your business. You can make $1 gazillion off of it, but you have to there has to be competition in the marketplace. When it's something like steel, when it's something like railroads, something that people have to have in our society in order to function, the government will start getting involved and preventing individual organizations from controlling the entire industry. So this was a huge step here, and this is 1912, 1902. This was super early in the 20th century, and from this point on, it was very rare for countries or organizations to effectively have a monopoly. That's why you don't see them a lot anymore. But this government regulation, the Antitrust Act, effectively kept businesses from keeping other people from achieving the American dream. And because of that, led to a more stable economy with more people being able to move up. So the question here is explain how antitrust laws help protect property rights, enforce contracts, and level the playing field for businesses. The main thing you need to know about the antitrust laws is the fact that it creates competition. By preventing one company from owning an entire industry, and the federal government regulates that, all right? By keeping one country from controlling an entire industry, it levels the playing field and opens it up for more people. So pause me, answer that completely, and we're moving on. All right, so another thing that the federal government can do, all right, to regulate the economy is they can reallocate resources. There is the ideas of like redistributing wealth, like taking money from rich people, give it to poor people. That's what a lot of times people will think of reallocation of resources, and that is something that can happen, but not the way you're thinking of it. It's usually taxing the rich more and providing services for the poorest part of society. That can be part of reallocation. But the government and their regulations have the ability to be much more heavy-handed on it. They don't do it often, but the resource allocation and reallocation has happened multiple times in American history, in which the government goes, in order to keep the economy going, literally will dictate raw materials to certain places. The most clear-cut example of this, and let's go back into history again, is World War II. So in World War II, America declares war on the whole world. America is at war with Germany, they're at war with Italy, and they're at war with Japan. Two-front war, needs a ton of supplies. So the United States government needed to maximize the use of our limited resources that we had for the war effort. So the United States government, to reallocate resources, literally created a group during World War II called the War Productions Board, which dictated who got what materials for what purposes. So obviously, Ford, the company Ford, in World War II actually did not even make cars in World War II. They made bombers because they had an intricate assembly line set up so they could make these very, very complex bombers and these airplanes. Other things that happened during World War II, there is a shortage of rubber. One of the main exporters of rubber was Germany, and America was going to trade with the country that we're trying to shoot. So there was a shortage of rubber. So any rubber got diverted to the war effort. And the government was able to do that so that we had enough rubber for our Jeeps and things like that in World War II. Not only that, the existing rubber that people already had, they were begging people to, number one, make sure that that you're not trying to buy new tires because there's a shortage of tires. By the way of doing this, the government actually increased gas prices so that people would drive less, and they lowered the speed limit so that it would use less gas. So the government, to try to save on rubber and reallocate resources for the war effort, not only that, they also encouraged people to recycle. And recycling was a huge part of World War II in this reallocation effort. There is a shortage of metal. Not that we were trading with metal with somebody else. Metal takes a while to make. When you go to war and you're fighting everybody, you need a lot of things made out of metal. So there was kind of a shortage of metal for things outside of the war industry. They also really encourage people to turn in their aluminum and their tin so that they can more effectively help the war effort. Even food, the government can reallocated these in World War II. Nobody starved to death in America in World War II. However, you could only buy a certain amount of food every day. It was enough food to survive on, and you weren't going to starve to death. It was plenty of food. But this way they could limit waste, and so that you can turn around and give not only food to the American troops, but we could provide food for our allies who were being attacked by these other countries and could not grow their own food. So rationing was very, very important in World War II because it allowed food to be given to the troops. Again, this is government regulation of reallocating resources. People would actually make their own victory gardens in World War II. That was a big pride of your country, that grow your own food, because the more food you grow, you can allocate more of that food to the troops in World War II. So America has the ability to reallocate natural resources to the industries that it needs it. And the whole point to do that is it benefits everybody. America needs to win this war. Not winning the war would have been catastrophic. So for the greater good of everybody, you had to reallocate resources. The government has to be the one that does this, because in our economy, which is government for the people, by the people, no private industry has the ability to take raw materials from other private industries. The government is the overseer of our society, and while they don't have complete and total control, it is the most fair organization since it is elected by the people and run by the people. So the question here is, explain what the purpose of reallocating resources is and why the government is the only entity that could do it in America. So pause me. You're more than welcome to use the World War II example here of why reallocating resources can be necessary at certain times. It's not always necessary, but sometimes it is, and World War II is a good example. But pause me, answer that completely. We're moving on. All right, regulation enforcement insecurities. What? We're going to talk specifically about the Security and Exchange Commission, the Security and Exchange Commission. So the SEC, not the Southeastern Conference in football. If you're a college football fan, that probably think SEC and you're like football or college sports. But the SEC is the Security and Exchange Commission. So this regulates the stock market, and you're like, oh, this seems boring. It's not. So the stock market and the Security Exchange Commission, also if you're trading shares and stuff like that, sometimes called securities, then the SEC wants to make sure everything is done fairly and honestly. The SEC is here looking out for the regular person, all right? So why do we have the Security and Exchange Commission? Well, let's talk about what happened before we had it. So there's a thing, and if you haven't before, we've talked about it a lot, called the Great Depression. So the stock market collapsed in 1929. One of the biggest reasons that the stock market collapsed is that people lied about how good their businesses were. They were buying and selling all the stuff on the stock market, and they were just making stuff up. Nobody was regulating it. Nobody was validating that if you say your company is worth this amount, that it's actually worth this amount. You could not even have a company and be selling shares for it. So it was wildly unregulated, and then when all that hit the fan, the entire stock market collapsed. Well, cool. Who cares about the stock market collapse? Well, it put everybody out of work. People who had never heard of the stock market lost their jobs because banks and other people had put their money in the stock market, and they lost their money. Long story short, the money in America went poof, gone because people lied in the stock market. So it was obvious in the Great Depression that you had to turn around and you had to regulate the stock market, all right, to make sure this never happens again. Otherwise, nobody's ever going to trust the stock market because it could just lose all your money again. This is why the Security and Exchange Commission comes out. This is a government entity that regulates the buying and selling of shares. So the SEC, and this is a group of the first people that were part of the SEC, the SEC come out and they want to make sure that when people sell stuff, that they're selling what's honest, and when they buy stuff, that they're buying things that are accurate. Now, You're like, cool. I'm sure that was like some businessmen and all those other, like, we don't have to think about that anymore. So if you deal with Wall Street buying and selling stocks, the SEC is like, if that's your full-time job, you have to be very aware of the SEC. They do not play. They do not play at all. I'll give you a modern example of this. Get out of the World War II time period. Let's talk about a modern example. All right. When I say modern, this is in the early 2000s. Do y'all know who this woman is? You may not. She's like wildly famous. You might know her name, but you might not recognize her off the top of your head. This is a woman named Martha Stewart. So Martha Stewart, she's a homemaker, had like shows like on TV, and she's like super famous. She's probably like a billionaire. I don't know if she's a billionaire. She's super, super rich. She has her own like furniture line at like retail stores and stuff, on top of like cookbooks and like homemaking stuff. Everybody knows who Martha Stewart is. She's just this very kind lady that teaches you how to like make Easter baskets and stuff on TV. All right. So Martha Stewart got in trouble with the SEC. All right. So what did she do? She did something called insider trading. So one of her friends was owned a company and was getting ready to sell the company or something like that. Basically, when her friend sold her company was going to like plummet in prices, and all that her friend's stocks would drop very quickly. Well, Martha Stewart owned a bunch of her friend's stocks. So when her friend said, hey, FYI, I'm getting ready to sell the company. Nobody knows this yet, but you might want to get out. And Martha Stewart said, appreciate it. And Martha Stewart sold all of her stocks, and then her friend sold her company, and then the stock market collapsed, or that company's stock went down, and Martha Stewart, got out in time. Well, that's wildly illegal in the Security Exchange Commission. You are not allowed to make publicly traded stuff on the stock market if it's private information. She only knew that because her friend told her. You're like, well, I mean, okay, guess you got in trouble. What'd you do? Have to pay a fine? Oh, no. Martha Stewart went to prison, all right? She's a convicted felon, all right? So this is Martha Stewart going to court on the left. This is her in prison on the right. Martha Stewart, who was like a superstar celebrity, she's never done anything scandalous. She has no criminal record, no nothing. This one thing that she did with insider trading went to prison. Now, I think she had like a 3-year prison sentence. She spent like a year, I believe, in actual prison, and then she was allowed to be on house arrest for like 2 years after that, like an ankle monitor, which, considering this is her house, a house arrest probably isn't as awful as it is for everybody else. And so Martha Stewart, she'd served her time. She did everything she was supposed to. She's back. And then it's funny now, and I know I'm dating myself depending on when you watch this. So present day, when this is being recorded, 2023, Martha Stewart has made a resurgence. She does her homemaker stuff, whatever. But she is actually really good friends with one of the most unlikely people, because they're so opposite, but they are like friends in real life and do a bunch of shows together. It's Martha Stewart and the rapper Snoop Dogg, who do like a bunch of stuff together, which is hilarious. And so Snoop Dogg's made his career on rapping about, stuff, and talk about drugs and violence and stuff like that. That's how he made his career. And then Martha Stewart made her career on being a homemaker and making baskets and stuff. And then only one of these people is a convicted felon, and it's Martha Stewart. But they do a lot of collab stuff, and their personalities are so opposite. It's awesome when they do stuff together, but they're like friends in real life. But the SEC is the government regulation of the stock market to make sure stuff like the Great Depression can't happen again. So the question is, what is the main function of the SEC, and how is it designed to protect markets and securities? So pause me, answer that completely. We're moving on. All right, another concept of reallocating resources, sometimes redistributing the wealth, which is used as a negative term, but the concept is trying to make sure everybody in a society is equal, comes to progressive taxation. Stay with me here, because this is really, really important, All right, when we get to personal finance, we'll talk about taxes more here too. But this is really talking about income tax, or taxes that you have to pay on money that you earn. So you probably think, and naturally, like, hey, you have to pay income tax on the money that you earn, you have to pay an income tax. Cool. You probably naturally think it's like a flat tax. A flat tax would be, all right, you have to pay 12 or 20% of your taxes go to the government. All right, and that would be a logical way of thinking. However, that is actually not how taxes work in America, or income tax. We have progressive income taxes, which is very different from a flat tax. So this actually changed with the 16th Amendment. All right, so the 16th Amendment happened right near the turn of the century, meaning the 1800s to the 1900s, in order to help poor people. All right. So a flat tax where everybody pays the exact same amount of taxes, we'll say it's 12%, 20%, whatever, all right, actually ends up being unfair, as crazy as that sounds. So progressive taxation means the more money that you make, the higher percentage in taxes that you pay, all right? So the reason that is because people who don't make very much money really can't afford to be giving away like money in taxes, whereas people that make $1 billion a year, absolutely have plenty of money to pay in taxes because they're not struggling to literally survive day to day. However, you don't want to punish people for making extra money, because we want to encourage people to be successful in the United States. So how do you do that? So it's like a proportional tax, all right? So the more money that you make, all right, the higher percentage in taxes that you make. So if you're only making like $15,000 a year, you might pay almost nothing in taxes. But if you're making $10 million a year, you could pay upwards of like 40% in taxes, all right? That sounds like you're being punished for making extra money. Want to be very clear how this works, because that is not technically what that means. So say you have to pay it, you make $1 billion and the government's like, it's a 70% tax rate. They don't take 70% of all your taxes or all your income. The progressive income tax means, like, say you make $25,000 a year. The $25,000, all right, gets taxed at 10%. So the lowest income bracket is 10%. So everybody that makes $25,000 a year pays 10% of income. Well, what happens if you make $50,000? Well, and that income is 15%. So the way the tax, and it gets complicated, taxes work where your first $25,000, if you made $50,000, when they do your taxes, your first $25,000, that only gets taxed at 10%. Then the second $25,000 here in the center graph with the blue, that gets taxed at 15%. So not the whole thing gets taxed at 15%. And then you can see here as you go further up, so your first $25,000, regardless if you only made $25,000 or you made $10 billion, that first $25,000 gets taxed at the same rate. So the reason that is because a progressive income tax helps really poor people keep more of their money, where people that have a lot of extra money are expected to pay more in taxes, but it's only the extra money they make above certain levels. And that's called the progressive income tax, but it's how the government is able to regulate taxes and making sure that the poorest people aren't having to lose vital individual dollars to taxes when they're just trying to survive from day to day. So the question here is, explain what a progressive income tax is and why that is more fair than everyone paying the same flat tax rate. I put it in quotes because it is still subjective, but generally speaking, all the evidence points to a progressive tax is more fair than having a flat tax. All right, so pause me, answer that completely. That's what I got for you guys today. See y'all tomorrow.